Hi there, Ronnie here, coming at you with a video. Um, Dave Wright, who is one of the committee members for Tabletop Scotland, posted up an interesting question. Well, I thought it was a fun, interesting question on Twitter, and I was going to give him a response, but I thought I'd make a video instead. Um, and his question was essentially asking, what would White Dwarf be like now? Now there may be people in the audience who are going, "What do you mean? What is it like now? It's still White Dwarf is still a thing." Some context. Um, White Dwarf, when it first began, was a magazine dedicated to role-playing games, and not just one company's role-playing games, just role-playing games in general. And yes, they would do reviews of figures and uh, uh, the odd board game and so on, but they were primarily focused on RPGs and reviews of RPG books, scenarios, new rule systems, and so on. And scenarios. Oh my god, they would print little scenarios. And they did some very fun things. I remember one scenario was dual statted. So you could use either basic D&D or Dragon Warriors, because it was done for sort of first level or first rank if you played Dragon Warriors. Um, and it was done for those two systems, and it was the same game. And it was interesting to, for me at least, as someone getting into the hobby, to compare and contrast. The first time I ever really heard about Call of Cthulhu was a little mini scenario that appeared in the very first issue I ever bought. That was called Fear of Flying, which would have the players on an aeroplane, and the idea was you could either uh, run it as a sort of one shot essentially, or stick it in your own campaign if they ever needed to do any sort of travel on a commercial flight. And I loved that idea. I thought it was great. And as someone who, like so many of us, started on basic D&D, the idea that there were role-playing games that dealt with different genres and so on interested me. Obviously, over time, White Dwarf sort of morphed into its current state, which is just Games Workshop's in-house mag, dealing with only Games Workshop products, specifically their Warhammer line. And what Dave was essentially asking, what would White Dwarf be like today if it had stayed as a general role-playing magazine? Would it have survived? Um, I mean, Warhammer is huge. I mean, it's a huge sort of global phenomenon, um, and is far more successful than RPGs are. Um, it's not something I play personally. I have played it. It's not something I play personally, but I can't deny the success of it. Um, and since White Dwarf stopped being a role-playing magazine, there were other magazines here in the UK trying to take over and sort of capture that lost audience. Games Master, then GM International, then Valkyrie, then Arcane. Um, all magazines I bought copies of over the years that they were released. Um, and they were never as successful. And I don't know whether that was because of a general downturn in RPG numbers or because they weren't the brand and didn't have the sort of network that White Dwarf had already established. They couldn't get the numbers. I don't know. I don't know why they weren't as successful, but they weren't. Um, they 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 were fantastic magazines in their own right, but they didn't last long. Would they still be around today, White Dwarf, if it had remained an RPG mag? I would hope so. And I would hope that it's stuck by its remit of being a general RPG mag. Um, I mean, yes, it would do D&D or AD&D as it was uh, scenarios at the time, but if you were someone looking for a dedicated magazine just for D&D, then obviously there was TSR's magazine Dragon. Um, which, whilst it would do reviews and so on of other RPGs, it was very much the D&D in-house mag. Um, I would love to have seen what would have happened in the 90s, into the noughties, into the teens, as we are, and into the tweens, as we are now, as they call it. Um, and seen how White Dwarf would have handled all the things, because one of the things I think would have been interesting. Yes, they would have done big issues on D&D 3rd and 3.5 and 4th and 5th and the soon to be 5.5 or 6, whatever they're going to call it. They would have done big features on that, undeniably. But a lot of other games that I think are as good as, if not better, in that environment, I think would have gotten a lot of love as well. I think you would have seen a lot of Savage Worlds. I think it's a very good chance you would have seen a lot of True 20, which would have uh, got a lot of interest and maybe generated more content for True 20, which I think is one of its major flaws. The fact that there's not a lot of content for it, as much as I like the system. I think a lot of Fate would have been dealt with, a lot of World of Darkness. Like to say that maybe a bit of Castle Falkenstein would have been done. Cult. There was a cult scenario done, I think it was for Valkyrie, and it got a lot of stick. It was called Bloody Kisses, and it was essentially a sequel to The Crow, the film. The problem is that the player characters were essentially on the periphery and weren't really in part of the main denouement. The main denouement of the scenario, and it got a lot of flack for that. But I would have liked to have seen a lot of cult scenarios. Maybe games that are good but have not been mainstream or as big as might have gotten a lot of more love if it had been a big headline magazine pushing them. I think of Dragon Age today. I'm repeating myself here, but I think Dragon Age is the best beginner system I've ever seen. Um, and I think content for that would have been very much welcomed. I think whether it would still be in print or whether it would have went down Dragon's route now, which is online, I think that's more likely. Um, But I would love to have seen a dedicated, White Dwarf remain a dedicated role playing magazine. Uh, I think it would certainly have helped. These days, there are so many vloggers like myself on YouTube, people doing live plays. I think we, in a sense, have bridged that gap, but I still think there's a place and a space for that sort of magazine. Um, and I'd love to see it back, personally. Uh, so, yeah, that's my answer to the question. Um, what are your thoughts? Let me know. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll be back soon with another video.